Hello, everyone. Took me a second there just to say hi. Somebody else is coming along to join me in a minute, but Hasbro reported quarterly earnings this morning, and I know a lot of people thought it was going to be a giant show of fecal matter hitting a wall. Turns out it really wasn't, uh, and we're going to find out why. Because I like it when good things happen. Sometimes good things should happen to everybody, and it's always nice to see people succeed. So let's take a look at what's going on with Hasbro. Currently, Hasbro for the day is up 11% after reporting their earnings this morning. They had earnings per share of 46 cents, beating expectations by 33.13. Sorry. Let's just say they went up just a little bit. They kicked the crap out of what people thought they were going to do, and by absolutely no small margin. They seem to be kind of fixing the company. So, their earnings per share are still down overall for the last 12 months in the negative space, but they are turning the ship around, it looks like. I mean, they beat the crap out of it. So they actually have positive earnings per share for the quarter, but the year is still down. So they're heading in the right direction. They did not mess it up. That is huge. So let's take a little look and see what people are saying. So they compared to estimates, they're beating it. Walmart beats Hasbro beats estimates, slashes costs. That's always a good thing. Earnings and revenue top estimates. Earnings and revenue top estimates. Now remember, a lot of people, especially if you're in the RPG space, people like to pick on Hasbro because Wizards of the Coast, it's kind of cool to dump on them and whatever. But Hasbro is more than just Wizards of the Coast. Hasbro is Monopoly and Magic the Gathering and Transformers and Nerf and all kinds of things. So let's go take a look at what all Hasbro actually does besides Dungeons and Dragons, because it's a lot. They are not a small company. Right, so they have all the merch for Transformers, Ghostbusters, Marvel, Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Avalon Hill, which is probably not nearly as big as it used to be. Oops. Dungeons and Dragons and Nerf. So they are not a small company. Everything from Beyblades to Furby to Monopoly to Transformers to Dungeons and Dragons to Baby Alive. You name it, these guys are in it in the toy industry. By the way, no, I am not someone you should ever take investment advice from. I'm just a guy who likes Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to see this company survive so I can keep getting new Dungeons and Dragons stuff. But let's go look at Monopoly, right? So they've got Monopoly in all kinds of forms now. They've got Monopoly over here, they got Monopoly over there, they got a Star Wars version, they have a Stranger Things version, they've got Prism, Knockout, Pokemon, you name it, man. They got Monopoly everywhere. So let's go look at what they did. Hasbro reports. They're a game company, a toy company, reported financial results for the fourth quarter and for the full year 2024. I'm proud of what we're delivering. Operational efficiency vastly improved our toy business. We're excited to bring up stellar lineup of toys, games, fans. Go down the list. In full year highlights, let's go look at the highlights. The highlight reel, as they say, because who doesn't like a good highlight reel? Now, where did it come in? Now, Hasbro is in the middle of a lawsuit with investors. So remember that this is going to be written by people who are in the middle of a lawsuit. They're going to write very carefully. They're going to write very conservatively. They're not going to try to overstate anything. They're not going to try to understate anything. They're going to try to get it right. Full year Hasbro revenue declined 17%, primarily driven primarily by E1 divestiture. So they sold off E1. Overall revenue decline driven by that, not surprising. Excluding this impact, revenue declined 7%. Growth of 4% in the Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment was offset by declines in consumer products, which went down 12, and entertainment down 88 or 4, excluding the E1 divestiture. So overall revenue is down, but profit margins are up. That's exactly what you want to see in a company, right? You don't want to see one that loses money constantly, because then the company ceases to exist. And that would be bad. But growth in Wizards of the Coast is an interesting thing. And remember, That is in the first bullet point of the highlight, right? So that is right up there. Wizards of the Coast is given credit for doing good things. Operating profit of $690 million and an operating margin of 16.7 includes $149 million of costs for acquired intangible amortization, loss on disposal of business, and costs associated with the company's transformation. So what that translates to in English is they basically got rid of some assets, they kind of rearranged a few things, they reformed a few things, they kind of upgraded some stuff, moved things around on the balance sheet, got rid of stuff that wasn't working, kept stuff that was, and it costs money to get rid of things, so that's where that comes from. Adjusted operating profit of $839 million, which is up $362 million versus the previous year, and adjusted operation margin of 20%, which is up 10 points from the previous year. Driven by the lap of 2023 non-recurring inventory costs, favorable business mix, and cost savings. Reported net earnings of $2.75 diluted per share. Adjusted net earnings, $4 per share diluted. Share benefit from improved operation, business mix, and tax favorability. Big translation of that is they made a lot of money. $370 million of gross savings and $227 million of net savings. Hasbro owned inventory down 17%. Now, that matters a lot if you're a business. I'm a business, but we're software, so we're a little different. I own a software company. I don't own any part of Hasbro. I own some stock, but not enough to make a difference. And but what this means is if you don't have inventory, you got to go pay to house, like stick in a warehouse someplace. That's a good thing because if it's sitting on a shelf, it's not making you any money. If it's being sold, it makes you money. You want to have that stuff kind of go in and out. All right. They paid $390 million in cash dividends to shareholders and reduced debt by $83 million. All good things. Shareholders took home some money. Debt went down. All good stuff. Operating cash flow of $847 million versus $726 million in the prior year, driven by improved profitability and working capital. Revenue increase of 4%. So Wizards of the Coast specific. We're going to get specific about Wizards of the Coast up top. They're not going to put the gaming division fourth. They're not going to do anything else first. They're going to put Wizards of the Coast in the first slot. Interesting. Revenue increase of 4% driven by strength in licensed and digital gaming. They licensed out digital gaming to a couple of companies. They made some money there. Good thing, right? Magic the Gathering revenues decreased 1% due to the lap of the Lord of the Rings set. So Lord of the Rings set they were fighting that. It went down 1%. Digital and licensed gaming increased 22% with Monopoly Go, contributing $112 million for the year. Operating profit increased 20% and operating margin of 41% was 5.7% higher than last year. That's a big, big, big number. I mean, that's not even small. That's huge. Consumer products saved. Revenue decreased 12%, driven by softer volume, exited brands, and reduced closeouts. So yeah, you exit some brands, you don't do as much revenue. That makes sense. Operating margin of 4.5 and adjusted operating margin of 6%, driven by Q4 versus 2023. Entertainment section. And I'm going to add somebody. Welcome, Bill Sylvie, the Dungeon Delver.
Hey, Tim. How are you? Thank you for having me on today.
No problem. So I'm going through this. This is my first look, and I'm going to go back and talk about a few things that I've already talked about because this is huge, man. Hasbro, look at their stock today. It's up 11%.
That ain't bad. That ain't chicken feed.
So right when they had their call was at 8:30, which on this chart is 9:30, I think, or somewhere around here. So they had their call. It went a straight line up, and it's still going up, 11.24% so far.
Wow,
that's a big day. Now, I know everybody wants to dunk on them because Wizards of the Coast, and I literally was just reading this out loud to people and giving my first impression. But I'm going to go back and get a little more in depth now that you're here because sometimes different people see different things because that's the way the world works. I will catch stuff that Bill won't catch, and Bill will catch stuff that I won't catch because that's the way those things go. Now, full year highlights. Let's start over there. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Okay. So full year highlights for 2024. full year Hasbro revenue declined 17% because they got rid of E1, right? Mm-hmm. So you get rid of a whole division, your revenue goes down. That's the way it works. Excluding that impact, revenue still went down 7%. When you're a company that's this big, having your revenue go down is not always a bad thing, because if you're actually doing revenue that's not making you anything, sometimes you don't mind it going down if you get the mix correct.
Okay.
So I can do $1 billion at 1%, or I can do $100 million at 20%. Which one do I want to do? I want to do $100 million at 20%, right? Because it's better for me, and it's less risky. It depends on the business space, but anyway. So growth of 4% in Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment was offset by declines in consumer products of 12% and entertainment of 88 or 4%, excluding E1. So Wizards got bigger, okay, by 4%. Now let's go down here where I noticed something. Full year 2024 segment details. In the pole position, they put Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming as this is what we want to show you that's good. Big companies don't put stuff in the pole position slot unless it's really good news.
Right.
Okay. Or you're about to go to business. It's either really good or really bad, and there's just nothing in the middle, right? But revenue increased to 4%, driven by strength of licensed and digital gaming. So it was actually stuff they licensed out or digital that actually caused them to grow. So
sure, very little overhead with that stuff.
Very little overhead, but that's actually a revenue driver, so more money came in on that as well.
Right.
Magic the Gathering decreased by 1% because they were up against Lord of the Rings from the previous year. And I don't know, are people Lord of the Rings fans? Is that still a thing?
I think I think by and large, I mean, if you want just the fuzzy pop culture point of view, I think it has shrunk down now to the point where you have casuals watching the TV show, and we're back to the tweed jacket and pipe set, which I consider myself part of, enjoying the books. I don't think there's much more than that. I haven't heard any major news about Lord of the Rings Online, and I think Games Workshop holds on to the LOTR tabletop battle game IP. I think they hold on to it just out of spite at this point.
Well, sure, but they weren't talking about this last quarter. They were talking about they were up against it from the previous year. Okay, so in the previous year, I think what that means is Magic the Gathering was doing a lot of Lord of the Rings sets.
Okay. I didn't know that. I knew that they had done like a few card crossovers, but I didn't realize that they had done like whole sets. I'm not up on my Magic the Gathering.
My kids saw them and bought them and played their friends, and that's the only reason I know. I'm not a big Magic the Gathering person. I've never have been. My personal preference is aside. Everybody has a game they love and a game they hate. I don't like games where you can buy success, and that's kind of what Magic the Gathering kind of comes across as to me, is you can buy your way to victory. All right. Anyway, but hey, more power to them. Hasbro does it. It's 10 times the size of Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of always will be. Digital and licensing gaming increased 22%, driven by Monopoly Go, contributing $112 million for the full year of 2024. So, man, when they put Monopoly Go on people's phones, they're just raking in cash with that thing. It's incredible. That's not a small number for a mobile app.
It ain't.
Okay, operating, especially one, because I build apps for a living, and pulling in that kind of money on a game that cost what that one would have cost to develop, that the return on that's incredible. Because that game it couldn't have been. I'd be shocked if it cost them $1 million to develop that thing. Operating profit increased 20%, and operating margin of 41% was 5.7% higher than last year due to digital licensing revenue mix, productivity gains, and lower royalty expense. So they renegotiated some things. The royalties weren't as expensive. Their margins went up. 41% is a solid margin. I mean, that's not a joke. That's real money. Consumer product division revenue went down because they exited some brands. Closeouts offset growth of licensed consumer products. So when you exit a brand and you got to sell off remaining inventory, that costs money. So revenue declined because of E1. That makes sense because you don't have that anymore. All right. Now, fourth quarter highlights. Fourth quarter Hasbro revenue declined 15 because of the divestiture. Due to lack of Lord of the Rings, consumer products declined 1% behind reduced volume, partially offset by licensed consumer growth. Okay, they're just repeating themselves. All this to me as a company, this looks like good news, and it looks like Wizards is kind of leading the way, and they're leading the way not with anything other than digital, which is kind of, I mean, Bill, you and I have been around since the Apple II days and before.
Mm-hmm.
We used to say, "Oh, digital's the future." I think digital's here. I don't know what tells me that, but I think we're here.
Yeah.
Total Hasbro up slightly in constant currency. Adjusted operating margin 21 to 22%. Those are good numbers for a company that produces products like this. They're doing a dividend. All kinds of interesting stuff. If they can solve the what you call it, the problem with the lawsuit, I think they're going to do a lot better. Let's continue, see if it'll pull it up. Let's go dig into some numbers here. Now, Hasbro as a company is notorious, and Wizards of the Coast of this company is notorious for not pulling apart Dungeons and Dragons from the rest of it. They're not going to show you what individual product lines did. Mm-hmm. They'll just say, toy division did this, game division did that, all these other things. A lot of these line items are meaningless for a lot of things, but some of them actually do have some meaning. So let's take a look. Cash and cash equivalents went up, right? So they have a little more cash than they did a year before. These are all in millions, so more than $500 million in cash and cash equivalents. Accounts receivable, almost $1 billion. Inventories, 274. So their inventory levels went down. That's in general a good thing when you've got that kind of inventory level. Prepared expenses and other current assets kind of went down. That's all good. Total assets sort of went down a little bit, but where'd they lose it? Somewhere in here they would have lost it. Property, okay, they got rid of some property. I don't know if I would count goodwill that high for them, but okay, whatever. Other intangible assets. All right, so they're hiding stuff inside there, but that's what big companies do. They're not going to tell you because it's a whole bunch of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, as a company, they did well. They did not. Damn, not disappointing. This is big for them because if you go look at cash flows from operational activities, look at December 2023, they lost 1.4 billion. Now December 2024, they made 394 million. That is a turnaround story. I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Those are big. Those are just huge numbers. So let's go look at, do they have anything else out here? They have a new strategy, play to win. Okay, they're not talking about.
Play with an L or pay with P-A-Y?
Play to win. Well, it all depends on your perspective, right? Because what a stockbroker calls play to win is not what you and I call play to win. Right, because you and I say my character lived or my character died, and therefore I won or lost in a way. They're probably just doing they're a new strategic plan. Games IP and toy company is unveiling a new play to win. I don't know. This is the first I've seen it. So, Playfield. Okay, through Playfield engagement, partner scaled co-invest. Hasbro seeks to expand its reach from over 500 million kids' families to over 750 million by 2027. So really what they're trying to do is expand their reach by 50%. That's aggressive growth, man. They're not kidding around. That's massive if they can pull that off. Mid-single digit growth revenue, 50 to 100 basis points. Okay, those are big numbers. Chris, he is not messing around. Oh, I saw Dungeons and Dragons. About Hasbro. Hasbro is a leading games, IP, and toy company whose mission is to create joy and community through the magic of play. I think the world needs more joy in its life.
I don't disagree with you.
We are too separated as a world. We need to get back to where we can learn to play and have fun. And as I cruise towards my retirement years, that's really what I want to do is play and have fun. My kids picked on me like when they asked me what I was going to do when they went off to college, and I said, "Well, I think I'll open an '80s arcade." And my daughter was like, "Great, so you get a chance to get out every day." I was like, "Why would I build it outside the house? Just have people over. It's just easier that way." Anyway, with 164 years of experience, Hasbro delivers groundbreaking play experiences with reaches 500 million kids, families, and fans around the world through physical and digital games, video games, toys, licensed consumer products, location-based entertainment, film, TV, and more. I hope, because there is a new live action Dungeons and Dragons things coming. I hope that gets extended out because I think it's in Forgotten Realms, if I remember right. I'm
Yes, I did drop a video about that. It is set in Forgotten Realms. Ostensibly, the D&D movie from 2023 was also set in Forgotten Realms, but they didn't really lean heavily into the lore other than just to kind of broad brush paint with it and say, oh yeah, this happens on the Sword Coast, and here are some D&D monsters, and kind of left it at that.
Well, that's actually a good point because one of the things, remember this series, this is the new Dragonlance Chronicles Anniversary Edition, right?
Okay.
Which I somehow ordered 2 of, and I still don't remember ordering the first one, but I have 2 of them now. Those stories I think were such good books, and I enjoyed reading them so much because it didn't really, like, if you take like a George R. R. Martin or certain fantasy writers, I'm not picking on George specifically, but he's easy to pick on. If he would ever finish his books, I would not pick on him as much, but I'm gonna. Dragonlance told you the lore and backstory only in a way to move the story forward.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It didn't say here's 20 pages of backstory. It made the joke in the movie about backstory, but that was Forgotten Realms. But in the books, they didn't really do that, and that's one of the things I really liked about them. So I hope that TV and film, I hope that accelerates. I hope that Forgotten Realms does well, and I hope Joe Manganiello, who's been trying for years to do a Dragonlance live action thing, I hope he gets the chance because I'd love to see it. Anyway. Through its franchise-first approach, Hasbro unlocks value from both new and legacy IP, including Magic: The Gathering, Dungeons & Dragons, Monopoly, Hasbro Games, Nerf, Transformers, Play-Doh, Peppa Pig, and other partner brands. So what this kind of thing means in English is, hey, we own this IP. Take Baldur's Gate, right? They didn't build Baldur's Gate. That was done by Larian Studios. Hasbro as a company figured out, hey, we don't really know how to make video games. That's not really our thing. Let's license it to you. We get some revenue off of it. You do your job, we'll do ours, and we own it, so we get a cut, you get a cut, everybody's happy. So I think they're looking at that as a way to bring in outside expertise on a budget because it doesn't cost you nearly as much to have an expert go do something as it does to try to grow that division yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. At least I think I do.
All right. Anybody have questions about that? No questions. But it looks like Hasbro did not disappoint. Now, one thing I want to point out, and Bill, I'm happy I love that you called in. Thanks for doing that on really short notice, is Hasbro's being sued by investors for kind of doing funky stuff with their information in a quarterly report, I think a year and a half ago or something. There's a class action lawsuit going on.
So I'd like to share a little bit of insight about this. Unfortunately, I don't have things archived. Back, I want to say it was late 2023. A lot of stuff started to show up, and I you know me, I'm all about ground game. But a lot of people started telling me, Bill, if you want cheap minis and tokens and dice, what you got to do is go to Ollie's. And I was like, Ollie's? That's like the clearance warehouse. What's going on at Ollie's? And people started sending me pictures and then links to Ollie's. They're a discount warehouse. They buy stuff en masse from companies that are clearing things out and then sell them. So like last year's toy of the year that every kid wanted, and was impossible to find, and $100 when you did find it, Ollie's would buy pallet loads of those, and then they're selling the thing that the kids want for like 5% of that. And that's what was happening. And they were selling Dungeons and Dragons board games. So if you wanted to go spend $40, you could get 300 pre-painted miniatures plus counters plus maps and tiles and
Wow.
stuff like that, because they were blowing these sets out. And from a hobby perspective, if you're like me and you just look, man, I just need a handful of orcs to throw on my tabletop terrain to game with. It was a great deal, but it spoke to something, and it spoke to basically Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, having way too much stock. And an investment group in South Florida that consisted of retired firemen, that is the primary clients of the investment group.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
pension fund. Their pension fund,
right.
which is massive, by the way. If you're in the investment community and you get the firefighters or the cops on your side, you have a massive pile of money to deal with. It's big.
Yeah. So the events with the toy discounts and everything, that caused a significant dip in the profitability of these retirement funds. And it was because Hasbro had played with the numbers behind the DM screen on the amount of stock, and by which I mean physical goods, not stock as in stock certificates, the amount of physical stock that they were sitting on. They were kind of playing games with that. The investment group caught wind of it, and they hit Hasbro with a not insignificant, for me, for the amount of money I make, a not insignificantly sized lawsuit has been leveled against Hasbro. And I did drop a video when that first appeared, and it's still rolling now, and it's still echoing. And so that brings us up to speed, Tim, I think, with what you were just about to talk about.
Yeah, and if I remember right, the lawsuit was based on they were misrepresenting their inventory levels on whether it was good or bad or something like that.
Yeah.
You said you had less, but you really were, because you just sold it off at some fraction of the cost or something, and they were all pissed off about it. And that's what I was saying. When you look at those inventory levels, it's bad to have a ton of stuff on the shelf. And I think and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not part of the lawsuit, and I'm not anybody you should ever take investment advice from, unless it's in tech startups that are pre-IPO, and then I'll talk about those all day long.
And I do have a link there, Tim, if we want to look at that. This is from...
I think those were alleging that the inventory levels were being misrepresented because they were cleaning it out quickly by reducing the wholesale price just to clean it out at some quick, Oh no, I don't have that much inventory. Just quick, sneak it out the back door.
Yeah, and they got caught here. So this is Bragar, Eagle, and Squire PC announces that a class action lawsuit has been filed against Hasbro, and encourages investors to contact the firm. And this is basically they go into what I was discussing, what Tim was discussing, and I want the absolute disclaimer on this. I'm not a law talking guy. All I do is play pretend elf on graph paper for a living. So,
I do occasionally want to get pulled over and say yes, officer. But that's
about it. What was the old joke? I was an honor student. Yes, Your Honor. No, Your Honor. No contest, Your Honor. But anyway, so this talks about that period.
2022 to 2023.
Yeah, February 2022 to October 25th, 2023. The investors had that window. And basically, so it says here, the Hasbro class action lawsuit alleges that on January 26, 2023, Hasbro previewed its fourth quarter results for FY 2022 and admitted that revenue would contract by 17% year over year. To combat weakening sales, Hasbro announced it would be laying off 15% of its global workforce, and at the same time disclosed that the immediate departure of its COO, defendant Eric Nyman. On this news, the price of Hasbro common stock fell by more than 8%. Then on October 26, 2023, they alleged that in announcing its financial results for the third quarter, Hasbro revealed an 18% decline in consumer product revenues. And in the attendant earnings call, Hasbro CEO further revealed that Hasbro was forecasting 50-ish million of one-time cost that was to be spent on moving through inventory at the retailer level. And this is where we get to the Ollie's blowouts of, $99 game sets selling for $9 and that sort of thing. Extra marketing.
Costs money to store stuff, man.
It does. And I'll tell you just a quick divergence. When Hasbro bought when Wizards of the Coast, prior to their purchase by Hasbro, when they bought TSR, I think it was Ryan Dancy said that when they went to Lake Geneva, the company was in such a state, they had warehouses and warehouses of stuff that they had oversold and were now stuck with box sets for campaigns that were never really all that popular. He said they even found like pallets of late first edition AD&D books, not your core stuff, not your David Trampier art, but like
orange spine stuff that was sort of
Manual of the Planes, stuff
Oriental
like that.
Adventures,
things that were sitting on pallets. Like here in 1999, 1998, some comic book store is going to call them up and say, hey, you guys got any late first edition books that didn't sell worth a damn 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And that they were hanging on to them. And the first thing they did with that stuff was pulp it.
Now, this is an interesting thing. So I've been looking into the history of TSR and things because I've toyed with the idea of writing a book. And there's a lot of books about the history of RPGs, but I kind of want to go back a level and look at games that came before it to sort of work it forward. And one of the things about that era of TSR that I find crazy is, number one, they cut the quality of those books way down, because if you look at the early Trampier books, they were really well put together, and some of those things, man, I still got some. Those things hold together well. Now, if you look at like Oriental Adventures and the Wilderness Guide and a few others, those were piles of crap, and they were sort of glued together. They were terrible quality.
Okay, so this is a little bit of TSR.
The Blooms
lore.
came in and take over, right?
So what happened was, very early on in TSR's history, Brian and Kevin Bloom made a financial move, told Gary, hey, all you need to do is concentrate on being the creative genius that is powering this company. We'll worry about the money. Because Gary's business partner, Don Kay, died unexpectedly at the age of 35. Mr. Kay's wife showed up and said, hey, my husband invested. I've heard it was as little as $500 or as much as $1,500, but to put that in $25, that would be $3,000 to $9,000 today.
It's nothing compared to what it turned into.
So the story goes, she drove up to Gary's house, took the boxes of Don K's Wargaming stuff and TSR booklets that he had printed and were being stored at his house, put it on Gary's front porch and said, I want my $500 or my $1,500, which Gary didn't have. TSR was quite literally an out-of-basement company at that point. And Brian and Kevin Bloom, who were gamers and they were friends of Gary's at the time, said, we will cover this. They went to their dad and said, we want to do this. We think that war games is going to be a very cool and profitable niche hobby. Help us do this. So their father, Brian and Kevin, stepped up, paid her off, got financial control of the company. Fast forward to 1986, they had driven the company into the ground while Gary was in California selling Dungeons and Dragons as a multimedia product. We had the D&D cartoon, and right at that time, Gary was in talks.
Awesome.
Which was awesome. Gary was in talks with Edgar Gross, John Boorman, and Orson Welles to create a D&D movie. Then he got the word that TSR was falling apart. He went back to Lake Geneva, which back in the 1970s and 80s, doing a movie deal, it wasn't something you could do by phone. It wasn't something you could do by telegram or by mail. You either sat there day to day and met with people, because there was no Zoom call, there was no email, there was no text, or your project just died. And Gary...
And Hollywood's still kind of like that, right? Depending on who you are, right? But
right.
To a certain extent, if you're a first timer and you're not out there in the room with somebody, if you're only going to meet with me, it's very much a hands-on kind of business. It's also a very nepotistic business, but we'll leave that part out of it.
So Gary left, the cartoon died, the movie died. He went back to TSR and immediately set about to righting the ship. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that went on at that time, but the thing is, he found out that in their mishandling of the company, they had let payments to Random House, who printed the hardback Dungeons and Dragons books, lapse. And it was not a significant amount. It was almost a token amount. They had such a sweetheart deal with Random House, and the books made Random House a fair chunk of change too. So he begged Random House for a little bit of credit, and then told the Blooms, I'm going to write a new D&D rule book, which became Unearthed Arcana. We're going to publish it. We're going to get profitable again. And they said, okay, that's swell. And then he said, the books are going to be bound this way, referring to how the Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, and Deities and Demigods, and the Fiend Folio were printed. And the Bloom Brothers said, that is 5 cents more per book than we want to spend. What about just gluing them together? What about just the glued option? And he said, that's dumb. They're going to fall apart. The kids use these things. Gamers use these things all the time. And they said, yeah, well, they'll have to buy 2 copies then, won't they? Unfortunately, their own return policies meant that comic stores and game stores were returning defective ones. So the initial run of Unearthed Arcana ended up costing them money, but the net outcome of it was, because Gary came back, wrote the book, got the book sold, they went from a pre-tax profit of $4 in 1985 to a post-tax profit of $23 million in 1986.
So, but during that part of that time, and this was part of the research I came across too, was now as a business owner, I get hit up all the time to go invest in businesses, and I know people who are investors, and I know a little bit about that space, not as much as I'd like to. So please don't ever take my investment advice. I'm putting that out there so I don't get sued. But I only deal in startup companies because I'm not a big fan of the stock market. I don't like crypto. I like small companies that are poised to grow. That's my sweet spot. It's what I understand, and I only kind of look at what I understand. Now, at that same time, TSR was still not a big company. It was still a family-run kind of thing, where the family might have shifted from Gygax to Bloom, but it was still family-ish run.
Yes.
A couple hundred employees. It wasn't even 1,000. It was hundreds, not thousands, right?
Yeah.
You could still call and ask for Margaret Weiss, and somebody would transfer the phone, right? That was the level it was at. And I think when Gary got back, I read someplace he found company cars all over the place. He found there was an effort to like raise a ship or something. They wanted to raise an actual pirate ship and like move it in, or some weird story.
There was there was a lot of strange stuff. TSR had ballooned to 300 employees, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but it was based in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which at that time had a population of like 4,000 people. So
Yeah, it's
Lake
a big
Geneva,
employer for Lake Geneva.
yeah, they literally employ that. That's like a steel mill in Pennsylvania, right? You know, they employ 10% of the town. But when Gary started digging through the books, he found out that a third of them never showed up for work. I don't mean worked remotely. Again, we're talking about the 1980s. Work
Yeah.
from home was not a thing. And so literally 100 people, all they did was shuffle in on Friday if they went in at all and they weren't just mailed to them, and got a paycheck
Yeah.
and then
so
went back home.
it's good to be a friend of the Williams, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. A company with 300 people in a town of 3,000 had a fleet of 100 cars.
That's a lot of cars.
They had they had hundreds of thousands of dollars in unopened systems furniture warehoused.
Yeah.
Just systems furniture stuck in a warehouse somewhere. They had boxed up computers. It was nuts.
And I think that's the important bit here, right? Because that's how TSR wound up as part of Wizards of the Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And as I understand the history of it, Wizards of the Coast was already kind of shopping themselves as a buyout possibility for somebody. And I think somebody else was talking to TSR at the time to buy them out, and I forget who it was, and I don't want to.
Well,
without
there's a bit of a there's a bit of a gap, but essentially, and this is funny. I spoke to the late Jim Ward about this. Jim, in the 90s, before he got disgusted, Gary got disgusted and left in 1986 when it was clear that Lorraine Williams and the Blooms were interested in killing the golden goose to get one more batch of eggs.
and tried to take Greyhawk with him, right? But didn't quite pull it
He
off.
kind of did. That's a little propeller headed.
Took Gord the Rogue with him, but he didn't take Greyhawk or something like that.
Right. He had to shift a few of the names, but they kept the Greyhawk IP. But Jim Ward told me that he sat down. He was always looking for new stuff to make TSR more profitable, so that the people who worked for him in the company would stay employed. And he went and he sat down and he played this game in the early 1990s. So this is 5 or 6 years after Gary has left. Lorraine Williams has control of the company. And he said, hey, I just played this cool game called Magic the Gathering. These guys are looking for investors. This is going to be hot. We need to get in here. We need to do this. And Lorraine Williams told him, we don't make card games. That's not what we do.
Yeah, we don't make baseball cards here.
We're not buying a card game. If we feel we need a card game, we'll make one. We're a games company, not a card game company. And that company 7 years later bought TSR.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, and she tried to do it with Buck Rogers and failed because it was a whole.
Yeah, she's Lorraine Williams is a descendant of Flint Dilley's, the creator of Buck Rogers, the original Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jim said the only reason there was a Buck Rogers RPG was because Lorraine Williams said, we will have a Buck Rogers RPG. We will milk that IP.
I actually have it on my shelf and it sucks. Okay, but I do have it.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's not good at all. And they actually put out a couple of fiction novels too, and none of them were any good. But I have those too, by the way. But it's just because I'm a junkie. I can quit buying books anytime I want. I swear.
You just don't want to.
If it's not called hoarding, if it's books, it's called a library. Okay, let's be
Right.
fair here. That's the way it works. But what happened? So the way I understand it was, so TSR got bought by Wizards. Wizards, not long after that, got bought by Hasbro because the people at Magic the Gathering wanted to cash out their billion-dollar baby, right? And as such, now as part of Hasbro, and it's kind of, Wizards is the most profitable part of Hasbro, as we just saw in the quarterly earnings, because of two things: video games and the card game. Because the card game, while it's a little bit smaller, it's a whole lot cheaper. It's a whole lot more volume and a lot more margin to keep selling the cards to people than it is to sell you and me a book that, we kind of sort of might. I'm going to keep mine forever. Like I've still got first edition. I've got fifth edition. I've got the new one. I've got some stuff I need to send to you. I've got other stuff. So it's like, I've got a ton of things around here that I buy once and I move on. But as with a card game, like I have 3 kids, I don't get to buy 1 set for them to play with. I get to buy 3 sets for everybody to play with, right? So it's from a marketing perspective, Magic the Gathering is always going to kick the crap out of Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
And D&D is not big enough to pull Hasbro up or down one way or the other. But the interesting thing to me is Hasbro is mentioning Wizards of the Coast way up front as a net positive in their quarterly earnings, because it's the storehouse for margin and revenue right now versus the gaming division. So
yeah.
I don't think Wizards is going anywhere. I think they're sticking around in the RPG space. They're not leaving. I do think because, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring up TSR and Gary, and thank you for coming on to be part of this. There's a lot of people, and there are YouTube channels who right now are probably prepping videos, and I will not mention who they are, who are going to say, it's over, it's all going to become digital, we're going to have Dungeons & Dragons Go. All that, I think, sounds great, because Gary wanted Dungeons & Dragons to be everywhere, all the time, video games. There was a big wheel. There was a pinball machine. Last time I saw one on eBay was like 18 grand. Yeah, there was he wanted it lunch boxes. He wanted it everywhere. And I think that's the goal of Hasbro, is to say, hey, we've got this IP. Why not put it more places? Because it's a valuable IP. Why not spread it out there so it can be seen, which was Gary's goal in the first place.
He wanted D&D to be as big as Star Wars. When my parents were caught up in the Satanic Panic, okay, I still, for Christmas one year, got 2 D&D beach towels, the Blue Dragon and the Green Maze, and in stocking stuffers, I got the D&D Monster Sweet Tarts, a couple of boxes of those, from my parents, who thought the devil was going to jump right out of those books and drag me to hell. All right. So, it was a huge multimedia push, and Gary wanted D&D to be that big. He was shopping a movie. He had built a cartoon show. He wanted comic books. He wanted these new video games.
And he got some of it.
And he did get some of it.
For instance, he did get some issues of a comic book. Right there.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the ripple effect of his drive. I don't think he was at TSR when the Dragonlance the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons comics came out from DC, but it remains that was something he wanted to push. Paul Stormberg, who is probably the TSR historian that anyone needs to listen to, you should definitely check out his podcast, When We Were Dragons. It's amazing. But I'm sorry, When We Were Wizards. But he talks about Rob Kuntz and Gary Gygax after they played the first fantasy RPG that Dave Arneson ran for them. He said they were numb in a good way. They said, this is unspeakably cool. How do we do this? How do we make our own and make it into something cool from day one?
And funny note, by the way, notice the name Rob Kuntz there. Okay.
Yes.
There were some people that on X the other day that were telling Rob Kuntz, who's active on X, that he was playing Dungeons and Dragons wrong.
Yeah.
I was watching this like, do you have any idea who this you're talking to?
Yeah.
Like,
well, frankly,
okay.
Dr. Teller, I don't think you understand a thing about nuclear fusion.
Yeah, I was like, I've had people. I am a physicist. My PhD is not just me putting PhD in there. I have one. It's in physics. It's not in phys ed. It's in experimental physics. I've worked in nuclear. I've worked in nanotech. I've worked in other areas that are still classified. But it's not a joke. I spent a decade at MIT. I've published in journals from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences to Chaos, Solitons, and Fractals to Physical Review. You can Google me. You'll find me. I'm everywhere. And you'll probably, if you want, if anybody suffers from insomnia, I will send you a copy of my doctoral dissertation. Okay, you will go bam right out. And you will
Better
know
than
more about,
propofol, folks.
absolutely, it's the RF properties of carbon nanostructures. Boom, you will fall asleep in minutes. But it's really cool stuff to me. Anyway, it is absolutely the cure for insomnia. Unless you're trying to figure out how to not bounce RF waves off something, then it's really interesting. But only inside certain frequency ranges. But anyway, I digress. My point is that I get that kind of stuff too. People on social media are like, well, you need to go study your physics. I'm like, yeah, I'm the one, right, that has this problem. Right? Rob Kuntz, oh, you don't understand RPGs. He's like, what? And he came unhinged, man. He was pissed.
Right, I got to say, I have met and talked to, and even on a couple of occasions worked with many TSR alumni. And a lot of them are very mellow, laid back. Aw, shucks, we were just having fun with the war games, folks. Rob's not one of them. And I don't say that with any degree of snark or sarcasm. I'll just straight up warn people, if you step to Rob, you better have receipts.
Yeah.
If you tell Rob, I heard that such and such was being served at Linda's in Lake Geneva on Saturday, May 25th, 1975, Rob can probably pull out the menu and prove you wrong.
Yeah, and he does not mind doing it.
No.
Part. He absolutely does not mind. Which is fantastic. He's very approachable too. If you try to talk to him, he'll answer. He lives in France, so his timing is a little bit off, but he will answer in a minute. I keep wanting to fly to France to go shop for wine and find out where he lives and go say hi. But it gives me two reasons to go to France. One is wine. The other is, who needs an excuse? It's France. Why don't you just go? Right. They don't like Americans, so tell them you're Canadian. It helps. Do not try to speak French to a Frenchman. It just don't. 90% of the country speaks English. Please don't try. You will make them mad. And the only way I've discovered as a traveler, and I've been to France a bunch of times, to make a Frenchman more angry, and if I try to come in as somebody who lives in Texas and try to speak French, which I know a little bit of, they'll get upset and switch to English and they'll be mildly annoyed, but happy that I sort of kind of tried. If you tell them, no, I'm fluent in French and I learned it in Quebec, that will really make them mad.
Yeah, I think they'll actually have you removed from the country if you're in France and you tell them you speak Quebecois.
Get your passport. Go. Just
get out.
Just
I will say this, and we are wandering far afield, but I love this story. I have heard from more than one source. There's a little thin section, maybe only a few kilometers deep, right on the northern shore of France, where they still love Americans and will happily put up with your well-meaning mangling of their language. It's just that there's a little section along the shore there where
that's actually true. I've been there.
Yeah,
they have a great respect for us there, but the rest of the country, they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Especially Paris, they have no use for us in Paris. Although I spent more, I spent a lot of hours at the Louvre, and I'd love to go back and spend more. Anyway, completely off topic. But anyway, Hasbro kicked Tushy on this. Let me throw it up again, just because if you have not seen it, and Bill and I kind of got off topic because that's what Bill and I do.
Yes.
Hasbro's up 12% today. I mean, that's a big number. They did not mess around on this quarter. They knocked it out of the park.
It is when you look at the lawsuit stuff I was talking about, this is such a 180 from 2022, 2023.
Yeah, this is
such a 180.
huge.
And it is not fed off of Baldur's Gate 3. That's over. That's done. That money is
In the bank.
in the rear view.
Yeah. This is,
And I'm not just. I just want to say, so everybody's clear. I'm not a Hasbro fan. I'm not a Wizards of the Coast fan. I'm not sitting here blowing sunshine.
he's not. In fact, if you try to get him to touch 5th edition, he'll put on rubber gloves.
Yeah, I put my nitrile gloves on that I use to handle 3D prints before they're cured to handle 5 ebooks. But so I say this as someone who just appreciates the realities, and I saw this come up in an article. I should have had this linked. I'm not going to go digging for it right now. But amongst the tabletop miniatures gaming hobby, which there's some Venn diagram crossover, less than you might think, with TTRPGs, but amongst that hobby, Games Workshop is the Hasbro, and there actually is a little bit of TSR crossover, because the people who founded Games Workshop, the name Games Workshop was a reference to their hobby store. They were the first company in the UK to distribute Dungeons and Dragons, and Gary actually offered to buy them. Imagine where we'd be if Gary had bought Games Workshop and made it part of TSR. But
looking backwards, and I can say this as a serial entrepreneur who owns my own business, and I've exited several successfully, some might say. There's always one or two moments in a business that you can see it was a turning point, and hindsight is always 2020. Right? You can always look backwards and go, that was the moment it got messed up. But you don't know that at the time, right? You always think you're doing the right thing. And it's always sort of easier with hindsight to look backwards and go, if they'd only... And there's 4 or 5 moments inside TSR where you could look at it and go, if they'd gone this way instead of that way, and it's like a 2-degree difference, the world would be a much different place. And it would probably still be its own company and still be in Lake Geneva and much bigger than it ever was. But that's not the world we live in. We live in a world where Hasbro owns it, and that's the way it works. But I do think that Hasbro, now that they've got their other problems sorted out, and I've got you on the screen there. Okay. Now that they've got their other problems sorted out, I think they're going to start to look at Magic the Gathering, and they may start looking at Dungeons and Dragons and trying to figure out how they can increase that revenue. Because if you're going to go from, if their stock report is right, and they want to go from 500 million to 750 million people playing their products, you got to boot all hands on deck. That's got to be Nerf, Transformers, Star Wars, D&D, Magic the Gathering. You're going to be throwing everything at everybody. That's a 50% increase in business they're looking for over a couple of years. That's huge.
That is.
So they're going to be looking to expand everything, not contract. You're going to see all kinds of new stuff coming out. I don't think you're going to see them slowing down. I think you see them speeding up.
And the parallel I'm making with Games Workshop here, because God knows we could be here another 3 hours just talking about GW's stock here. But this is from 2024, and I mean, their 2023, 2024, huge profits for this company. And the reason I bring this up, and again, I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but the reason I bring it up is there's a cottage industry on social media built around predicting the imminent collapse of Games Workshop. And look, just because that line, I mean, you can do funny things with graphs. I learned this in a speech class way back in college before the earth cooled. If you look at the graph, and way up at the top of the graph where the line just keeps going up and going up, there's a little like 3 pixel or 1/16 of an inch dip down. And you go, oh, look, they're off their profits, but yeah, just look at the rest of it. But if you zoom into that and just keep zooming down, and now all of a sudden your dip down is not a 1/16 of an inch long, it's 4 page inches long. And you say their profits fell from 11.5% to 11.3%.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's terrible. That guys, again, and Games Workshop is not a company I like either. Hasbro's not going anywhere. Games Workshop's not going anywhere. They're
No,
they're not.
and based on the numbers of them trying to pull in, they're openly stating they want to increase the number of their customers by 50%.
Yeah.
They're not going to slow down on new releases. It's going to speed up, and I think it's going to speed up in every product line. If you're going to try to increase by 50% in a couple of years, which is what they're saying, you can't. Oh well, we just released new books, so we're not going to do anything. I think like take Dungeons and Dragons for instance, because it's the product line of theirs I know as much about as anything other than Nerf, because my kids still play Nerf Wars with each other. I am the reigning house champion, by the way. I have hit more people where they don't want to be hit with a Nerf gun than anybody else in this house, mostly because I have the nicer guns.
You can also build a close-in weapon system that uses AI to target them, Tim.
I did that actually. I built a little Nerf launcher. So I did that when I worked on Patriot Missile. So there's a little Nerf missile launcher you used to be able to get on thinkgeek.com that would run on a USB port.
Mm-hmm.
I hooked a webcam to it, and it would track people across the room
No.
without me having to do it. So I'm like this close to integrating facial recognition software, so it just shoots the people I want. But I did that. But mostly I win because I can afford better Nerf guns than my kids. And they think that's cheating. I don't really care. I'm still winning. But the point is, they're going to try to expand everywhere, from Nerf to Dungeons & Dragons to Magic the Gathering. They're going to be putting all hands on deck. And yes, for people who are saying, oh, it is all going to be digital, you're going to see some digital. You're going to see the expansion of D&D Online. You're going to see that. I get it. I think you're still going to see more books. I think you're going to see more printed stuff. You're going to see a 50% increase in business is massive. You're going to be across the board trying to put everything out everywhere you can. You're not going to pick and choose one spot or another. It's the only way you're going to get that kind of increase.
I legitimately hope you're right about that. Chris Cox. Now it's been a few years, but I think when Chris Cox came in, one of the things he was talking about was, well, most, like 90% of D&D players will have them on digital, and then books will become a boutique thing, a premium thing that only the true collector will want to get. And I don't want that. I want physical books in people's hands.
I agree with you, and I hope it doesn't go that way, but let me tell you where that comes from. And that's not just a Chris Cox thing, and not just a Hasbro thing. I've written a couple of fiction novels. I'm working on a nonfiction book. And I know authors, both New York Times bestseller list and the guy next door who wrote a book about the tinfoil hat crowd. Right. So I'm in acknowledgments for books from David Baldacci. I've met a number of very, very, very successful authors. And even those that have been around since the 70s will tell you that digital Kindle books are outselling print books like 50-1 at this point. It doesn't matter who you are, what your name is. Stephen King is selling more digital copies than he's selling print books. His first edition, the first hardcovers, those all sell out instantly because he's Stephen King. David Baldacci, same thing. You could slap Tom Clancy's name on a hardcover and it's going to sell out 1 million copies in hardcover because there's people who want them. But if you look at digital sales, way more than anything in print. So what he's doing is he's looking at industry trends. I'm 53 years old. I prefer print. My kids, who are in their teenagers, gee, Dad, can I get this on digital? It's not that he wants to go digital. It's that the world is heading that direction, and he's just looking at overall market trends. And I agree. I want print to stick around as much as anybody, and I will pay more for it because I'm a print guy. Because I spend all my life on a computer, I don't really want to spend more. My kids, on the other hand, as teenagers, would much rather have print, digital, and somewhere around here, even I have a Kindle. So, it's a convenience thing, and I get it. That's where the market is going. So he's saying that because that's a market trend, and he has to satisfy that market. If he only did print, you've just gotten yourself away from teenagers, and you've got to open up that market space. So you got to think of it from the business side. I'd love to force my kids into print, but it's not going to happen.
I mean, When I was 17, I had a print book bookcase in my bedroom, and I had a few dozen books on it. I had maybe 70, 80, 90 paperbacks, of various kind, of course, comic books, RPG books, silly things, all the world's warplanes and stuff like that. But I had a lot of science fiction.
I have a bunch of World War II ones that are like all the equipment from both
nice.
sides.
And I think my 17-year-old daughter has, not counting manga and so on, I think she has maybe a dozen physical books. And that's because my wife and I are weird book hoarders. I think if we were the average family, she might have less. I'm not saying she would read less. I'm just saying she might be more digital even than she already is.
So I started a Instagram account just for book covers of mine so that I can stop buying duplicates. So that when
That's
I'm at
a good way to keep track of it.
When I'm at half price books, I'm like, do I have that? I can actually go look it up. And then I realized I have so many, as you can see flipping by, that I've only got about a third of them on here. So no, I don't like print at all. I happen to really enjoy it. By the way, Andre Norton, if nobody's read Andre Norton, absolutely great author and quite cute. I mean,
first D&D novel ever.
And by the way, Andre Norton's actually a woman. Don't let that confuse you.
Yes. She lived over in the next suburb over, which unfortunately I didn't realize that, and I never got to meet Miss Norton.
But yeah, she lived in Florida a long time. So yeah, I kind of went crazy and started doing this, and I'm still working on it. So.
I think probably, at least for me, unless you've got any questions for me, I think the ultimate, and this wasn't even recently. This was 5-6 years ago. I think the ultimate thing regarding the expansion of Hasbro's IP, what they're pushing for. I was at a gaming superstore that we have down here called Cool Stuff Inc. And they are a Magic the Gathering warehouse. They have a row of computers, plus they have an app you can download. Where you go in, you type in the card you want, and you walk up to the counter, and they pull out of stock and sell it to you. And there's guys who will come in, build a deck like that, turn around, play Magic. And it's just rows upon rows of tables. They also have a lot of board games and a small selection of RPGs, but they are a Magic the Gathering and collectible miniatures superstore. I was up there one day buying some like some paints and brushes. They actually used to sell metal minis and so on and etc. And while I was waiting for them to pull my order, because you buy the stuff the same way, I'll never forget, because I thought about how funny it was. There were two women, middle-aged, little older than I was at the time, and they were sitting at one of the game tables. And I remember I was struck because they both sounded like Marissa Tomei from what's the movie My Cousin Vinny. They're just yammering back and forth, and I'm thinking to myself, these poor ladies. This is somebody's like mom and aunt or mothers, and they got press ganged while their nerd son is here playing Magic the Gathering, and I'm standing in the line waiting, and I'm near their table, and one of them says, "Yeah, well, I guess while we wait, sure," and she pulls a Magic the Gathering deck out of her purse. And the other woman did too, and they sat down, they sat there, and they proceeded to put these housewives of Central New Jersey
are playing Magic the Gathering.
And if that don't tell you that they're doing something right, no matter how much we might not like the company, and I don't know what to tell you. That's market penetration, and they're going to keep on doing it.
Yeah, they know what they're doing, and if they're going to increase by 50, that's a big ass goal, man. That's a
yep.
If you putting a 50, if you put a goal of an increase of 50% and you put it in your quarterly report, it is now written down in print. And if you're a CEO who's responsible for that quarterly report, you better have a plan in place to get that done. Or 2 years from now, somebody's going to come at you and go, "Dude, what happened to the plan? You said you were going to do this, right?" That's the kind of thing that come back to bite you in the ass. So he's got a plan to do that already, or that shit wouldn't be in print.
Yep. You point at the bleachers, You better hit the ball out there.
You better. All right, I'm going to call it there. But Hasbro knocked that out of the park, man. I don't think they're going anywhere. So thank you, everybody. I linked Bill's thing in the comments for YouTube. He has promised that if he gets over 10,000 subscribers, he will do an in-person con where we all get to play RPGs in Central Florida. And it's my mission in life to get Bill up over 10,000. So what are you at now?
69. I'm just shy of 6,900.
Oh, we're gonna fix
Nice.
that. I'll find a way to fix it. All right, man. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.